Please put your hands together for AFONSO.
Thank you so much. Yeah, awesome. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And let's make it a bit of a talk instead of a speech. So if you have any questions during the middle of my presentation, feel free to put your hands up and maybe shout it out. Okay, so a bit about me. As you can see, I have a bit of an accent. So I'm Portuguese, and I also used to live in Uruguay. And due to the coronavirus, I haven't seen my family in about 2 years, give or take. It's not great, but on the other hand, my carbon footprint has been going down because I can't fly. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how there are some things that have a huge impact in our impact on this environment, and some things that don't have that much of an impact, but are great for conversations and start thinking about what is happening. So the way I got into the environment, I'm an environmental engineer and I studied at UNSW, a university down the road, was that, I was a kid and I was like, okay, this of the environment, I think it's going to be the next big thing. I think there's a lot of people on this planet and we have to find a way to somehow make it better for everyone around us. So I came to UNSW and I studied under someone called Tommy Wildman, and he's a researcher that created the paper that defines carbon footprint. He's been cited more than 20,000 times, and the first assignment at uni was calculate your own carbon footprint. And we're giving in an Excel spreadsheet with 20,000 factors where we had to input how many clothes you buy, what do you eat, how do you travel, all these little details, the type of fuel that you use, the type of car, the amount of tires, all these little details. And at the end, we had to compare the footprint that you got against your peers. And mine was 5 times everyone else's. And I was like, whoa, I'm half vegan, I don't eat a lot of meat. I have a bicycle, I don't have enough money to buy a car. I should be, on the lower spectrum, but no. So I went back into my numbers and I found out flying was a big deal. Flying was killing my assessment. I wasn't getting like A+ in this assessment because I wasn't doing very well. So that got me thinking, what is important and what is less important, and how should we go about our lives and not feel climate anxiety and feel that some things don't have to be perfect and we'll make some choices somewhere else. So today I'll talk about sustainability with a little typo and the 3 pillars. Something that's called the ecological footprint that you might not have heard about, and if you did, that's great. We're going to dive down into that and how to reduce it. Okay, I want to also get you into the right mindset by using this phrase. We have borrowed this planet from our grandchildren, and this phrase, this quote, does 2 things. One, it changes our perception about the ownership of this planet, okay? If you think about a house, if you rent, you can't just go and paint the whole wall or hang pictures everywhere or maybe refurbish your own kitchen. You have to ask for permission. And this is what we need to start doing with this planet. It asks for permission from someone in the future. Grandchildren means they might be 50 years away, maybe 40. So the time scale of your actions and the way you act upon this planet needs to change not only on what we do, but the time frame that we think about of what we're doing. Into the 3 pillars of sustainability. You've probably seen this in magazines, in articles. ABC uses some sort of graphics like this when they talk about any new law regarding sustainability. And there's 3 aspects. There's a social aspect, there's an environmental aspect, and an economic aspect. And if you look at that, you will think, let's build a dam, right? Let's build a dam to get renewable energies. But building a dam has its consequences. In the social aspect, you might have to move a couple towns. Maybe you'll have to move 10,000 people and switch where they're living. Then you have the environmental aspect. Yes, you're going to get renewable energy, but what about all the animals that are going to lose their habitat? What about all the trees that are going to be submerged and that won't absorb any carbon because they're underwater? And the economic fact, okay, how many jobs are you creating? What's the economic benefit of this thing? But there's a bit of an issue with this graph. The size of the circles assume that every component is the same, that the social is the same as the environment, the same as economic. And you can imply that by using this image, you can take, 2 units of the environment, arbitrary units, 2 units of the social, and make 4 units of the economics. And that is fine, because we just traded and nothing in the universe is created. We just change where they're coming from. But it's kind of flawed, because in how we are nowadays, economics shouldn't have the same impact as the environment or the social. It should be a means to get to an end. So if we switch the graph to something like this, we see that the society is inside the environment, and the economy is a construct of society. And therefore, we first need to address the bigger circle, which has a larger area, then the next one, society, and finally, the economy. And with this, we see that the economy is just a means to get to an end. It's to meet humans' needs, our necessity to be happy, to live a good life, while keeping the ecological constraints in mind. And that's where I go to my next point, this ecological constraint. What does that mean to be constrained? Constraint means that you can't do all the time all you want because someone is telling you no. And in this case, the person telling you no is nature, is this planet. Carbon footprint versus ecological footprint. And that's where I'm going to dive down in a second. Everyone, and keep that environmental, ecological constraint in mind. Everyone has heard of carbon footprint, it's everywhere nowadays. You might buy, carbon neutral products, and there's a gold standard for companies, and Patagonia is doing an amazing job. But most of the times, it just focuses on the emissions of a company, the emissions of a product. And more importantly, it normally focuses on that middle part, that green bit on the slide, which is, okay, I might have a company, which I have, it's called Little Pepino, you can buy some products down at the desk, but if I want to assess the impact of my company, I can see, okay, what's the amount of electricity that I use to run my company? How big is the building where we run our warehouse and we ship our products? That's great. And my products might be made of sustainable materials because they can be composted, and it's great, it's a good switch from plastic, but how much energy did they use to make my product? And it's coming from overseas. What's the impact on the factory that produced my products? How did those people go to work? What is the air conditioning like inside those factories? And where do they put their trash? Because my trash, my products, they can go into your compost bin. That's great. But that's if I do it. What about you, that you bought my product and might not have a compost bin? Would you put it in landfill? So all these actions that I don't have control of will have an impact on the carbon footprint of my product. And that's why it's not only important to think about that, but think about all the resources that we've used, all the processes that in the future you will have to account for to be able to claim this carbon neutrality or the footprint of your products. That's why we have something called ecological footprint. I'm going to read the definition here. Ecological footprint measures how fast we consume resources and generate waste compared to how fast nature can absorb our waste and generate new resources. So ecological footprint is not a measure like tons of CO2. It's a rate. It's a comparison between how much are we consuming and how much is land that's singular, there's only one place, one planet can take or produce the resources. As an example, let's say I'm going to produce a textile, a t-shirt, right? I might need land to grow my wool. I might need a factory somewhere that might have chopped some land to exist to produce the dyes. I might have a different factory that will take those dyes, will transport my wool, will put it together, will make it, let's say, yellow. Then it's going to ship all the way across the country so that I can use it. And when I use it, I'll wash it, and that electricity we might need coal to be produced. We might need a solar panel to be produced. It will take space and resources. And at the end, I might put it in the bin. So we'll need a place in landfill, if it's not going to get decomposed somewhere, to live forever or until it disappears and releases gases into the atmosphere. And that way that nature is able to provide all those resources from the beginning to an end, it's called a biocapacity. And if you think about energy, you say, okay, what if I made everything out of renewable energy? Okay, I'll use solar and wind energy. That's great. But I can also say coal is a renewable energy. What do you mean coal is a renewable energy? Yes, coal takes 200 million years to replenish itself. So if I was to take 1 gram of coal from the earth, use it, wait 200 million years, it will come back again. And that's the rate at which nature will replenish that resource. So if you think about that rate, you can say we have the right to use a shoe size of footprint. The issue here is that our footprint is way bigger than our shoe because we walk faster or because we use an oversized shoe. And when I say oversized shoe, I might say I only need 5 t-shirts a month because I can wash them, but I have 20, right? So it's not really appropriate to the size of the person that we are to consume that much. So how do we reduce that footprint? I've mentioned that, okay, use less shirts, use renewable energy, taking into account your actions, and maybe offset. You know, it's something that you talk nowadays, or someone is offsetting their emissions. And that's great. That takes into account your carbon footprint, not your ecological footprint, because you had to use the resources. And the issue with offsetting from a science-based perspective is, put it this way, most of the way people offset nowadays is planting trees. You know, you buy a t-shirt, you plant a tree. That's great. The problem is a tree might take 50 years to claim back the carbon from your t-shirt. But someone is offsetting today those emissions, assuming that in 50 years that tree will still be there. So even at the rate that we're offsetting, it's biased. It's not taking into account the rate it takes to absorb those emissions. So the first step should be to understand in which part of our activities as a company, as an individual, and sorry for the very complex graph, but I'll break it down in a second, that is emitting the most on your carbon and ecological footprint and action there. So this is the life cycle assessment. It's what researchers use to calculate what are the emissions of a product or a process. In this case, I'm looking at textiles, and there'll be fossil fuel extraction to run factories and whatnot. There'll be getting the materials, there'll be dyeing and finishings, there's assembly, there's shipping it out to the consumer to use, there's a usage phase, you know, that also requires energy, like washing and maintenance, and suddenly there's disposable. And then you have a decision. Should I close the loop, circular economy? Should I remanufacture this garment, or should I reuse it, or should I put it in landfill? The size of those arrows at the bottom, the ones that go horizontally along the graph, represent the amount of energy that you will use again to restart the process. So if I want to close the loop, which means grabbing that material and take it all the way down to the factory to be disassembled, produce new types of wool, to start a new item, we'll need to go all the way down the chain again, requiring more dyeing, more finishing, more sewing and assembly, and customer use again. So that's a lot of energy. I could choose to remanufacture. Maybe I'll do some switches with my t-shirt. I'll put a couple t-shirts together, create a dress out of all t-shirts. That's good because I won't do any dyeing. I won't go back to the original factory. Or I can reuse. I can maybe take an old t-shirt and make it something to clean my kitchen with, or give it to someone else. That arrow is very, very little compared to the other ones. And that's why it is important to look at this graph. This is a more user-friendly graph. Maybe a kid did it. And you'll focus that the y-axis, the one on the right, says annual savings, means how much carbon in tons will you save by doing certain activities. And you look on the left, on your left, that you'll have changing your light bulbs, you have things like recycling, you have something like washing your clothes with cold water, and that's really small. Doesn't seem very, very effective, right? You know, those things there, that's quite insignificant when you compare to other things like flying less, all the way to having less children, right? And so you say, why is that? Why are those things quite insignificant? Because back in the graph, recycling goes all the way to the closed loop line. It goes all the way to the beginning. I'm taking that glass and sending it back to a factory, crushing it, making it powder, melting it again, creating a new bottle, dyeing it, putting a new label. That's a lot of energy. But if you look at the other actions, it's choosing to maybe buying a new kind of energy supplier. Maybe it's choosing to ride my bicycle to work. Maybe it's choosing not to fly. Maybe it's choosing to live a life with less items or have less kids. And what's amazing about this, that brings some joy, is inside the square, it is everything that you can buy off someone. You are counting, as a consumer, on companies to do better, to produce more efficient lights, to produce more sustainable clothes, to produce better cars that, take renewable energies. But on the right side, on the things that make an impact, is just you saying no. And like my co-founder says, Lottie, that the best things that you need is the thing that you already have. Is that t-shirt that you already have. Is the things that you don't have to buy new, but use again, because you don't want to go back to the beginning of the cycle. You don't want to put it in the bin and send it to recycling. So why is this key? Because science uses something when it comes to the environment called the cautionary principle. It's because technology today is not there yet to know exactly what is the impact of every single process along the way to produce something. We can go and ask someone in India to show a sustainability report of their factory because they don't have the technology to figure out yet. They don't have the technology to know what truck do they use for moving from one point to the other. They don't have the technology to know exactly what's the impact of a certain dye that I'm using. I don't even know what you are going to do with the items after you finish buying. I can do an estimate, an average, but I don't quite have the technology information to pinpoint those emissions. Therefore, the cautionary principle says, assume the worst. Every time you're going to make a new product, make a new decision, assume that it's going to have a bad impact. When you're building that new dam, assume that the impact of that dam is going to be the worst possible ever, and prepare for that. Take the people that are around the dam into account. Take that maybe the habitat you're going to impact when the water level rises, it's actually super important for the ecosystem, and it's going to have long-lasting negative impacts. Because if you prepare for that and you readjust your designs, your daily decisions for that, you are going to have less impact. And today, until technology doesn't get there, we'll have to make those decisions inside and outside this little square of saying no to things, because they probably have a worse impact than they actually have. But I want to end on a positive note, is if it's not us who come on a rainy Saturday to chats like this, who care about, what's happening next, vertical gardens, composting, reusing stuff, then who's going to do it? If it's not us, focusing on all the things here and maybe grabbing the stuff that are inside that little square that might not have impact to start conversations, Maybe you take your keep cup. It might not be the highest impact thing that's going to change your carbon footprint, but it will have impact to start a conversation with someone and saying, look, I'm using mine, why don't you use yours? Or if I decide to don't give as many gifts this Christmas and make it myself, maybe it's not a big change, but it will take into account the conversations that you're building, and maybe next time Karoma has a chat like this, they'll come and they'll learn about the things that you're learning today. So, if it's not us, then who? If it's not now, when things are not doing so well, who's going to do it? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Afonso. Do we have any questions for Afonso? Any questions? Come on, at least one. Thank you, sir.
Hi, thanks. I noticed on the list of things you can do, the biggest impact by far was having one less child. Have you also looked at what does that mean with migration, for example, if we take in one less person? Is it the same impact or is it less because they already exist somewhere?
So again, the topic of migration, in being a migrant myself, is you're putting boundaries on a country itself. And you can compare footprints between countries, between borders, and give accountability to certain leaders. But the issue nowadays with the interconnectivity of our supply chain, that element of is it living in a region or the other kind of dissipates and disappears, because most likely the items that you're using, they come from somewhere else. So even though that individual, that person is not impact the carbon footprint inside your boundary of a country, when we are doing something like this, if you look, there's an upstream section and a downstream. That upstream might not be in this country, but 80% of an emissions of an item come from the upstream, somewhere else, that you're not going to use in the calculations of saying, oh, I became carbon neutral. They come from somewhere else. That's why it's important to those boundaries to be linked to a product, not by a physical region in the planet, if that answers your question. What's the other part of the question? Sorry, can you, excuse me, can you give the mic again? Because
It does in a sense, but I guess it sounds like it's a bit more complicated, because it would depend on where the person is before they move to a different country, like Australia or America, for example.
Yeah.
Would their carbon footprint be lower where they were from? Does it become higher because they've come to Australia? Because we tend to be a high carbon footprint country.
Yeah, you know, that's a fair question, and I don't have the answer, but I understand what you're saying. If I come from a country that might have a lower carbon footprint, and then I migrate to Australia, which is known to have a higher average carbon footprint per capita, will that have a negative impact with migration? I wouldn't know the answer for that, or like the positive and negatives of that migration in the terms of carbon footprint. But I can figure out the answer. Any more questions? Yeah.
Hey, I have two questions.
Yeah. That's a lot of questions.
Yeah. With globalization, obviously comes a lot of efficiencies in terms of manufacturing and everything like that. Do you think somehow kind of reversing that and going back to local practices may have a better impact than all the efficiencies that come with globalizations? And then another more personal question, how did you get into all of this as well?
Yeah, awesome. I'll answer the first question first. Certainly, you can break it down to a very simple problem, which is e-commerce nowadays, right? Shipping is a big contribution to the carbon footprint of an item, which will be in that maybe downstream component of the activities. If you buy from something local, something that was like made near you, you are directly reducing the footprint of that item. With that being said, the way some economies in the studies that they've done have evolved towards is, if you want to reconstruct today what you had to be able to supply for everything that we consume to meet those human needs, it's quite hard. So the research shows that we're going to move more into the optimization of processes, better energy, better materials, than actually have a full switch to producing everything local, because it's kind of going backwards. It's a bit already too late to move production locally again. There will need to be a drive from education and asking humans to consume less of things that they know they can be produced close by, than actually improving those processes. How I got into this, in Uruguay, where I lived from 14 to 18 years old, I entered the project was building sustainable housing for disadvantaged communities using mud. So you basically build a house with water and dirt. And the impact or the footprint of that house is minimal. And I was like, okay, if I'm 17 or 16 and I can make a house for people to live in without needing anything from anywhere else in the world, I think this is pretty cool. So let me get on a plane, contaminate a little bit on the way there, but let me go to Australia and learn from the best. So yeah.
You've spoken a little bit about flying today, and one of the things I often see, back when I used to fly, was that box to check to carbon offset my flight, which there was a financial charge for that. Is that just marketing BS, and I shouldn't put that dollar there? And if it is, where should I put that dollar?
Yeah, so my recommendation is yes and no. One, that money will go somewhere that is going to actually maybe plant a tree or create a reef somewhere else, but you're better off not using the predefined place to check the box and pay the 60 cents for flying from here all the way to Brisbane. You're better off going into a specific provider of offsetting solutions who charge a higher price for your carbon, which means actually to run my project, which is creating, let's say, a forest in Western Australia that they're doing now. Is like this, I think it's the forest strip, it's like 100 square K of forest. It actually costs more money than those 60 cents. So I'm gonna charge you the real price, and I can assure you that I'm doing what matches your price. Because that carbon price of 60 cents at the moment is somehow arbitrary. It's a price defined by the market of what do you think we should value a carbon price. Because if you increase that, and let's say in 5 years' time, companies are being taxed because of their carbon emissions, suddenly that's a very huge cost. So there's a tendency of keeping that low. I would not tick that box and go on Google and say carbon offsetting subscriptions and actually put the distance of your flight, if you're flying economy or not, or business, and pay the maybe $25 that they charge you, not the 60 cents.
Beautiful. We better wrap and stretch our legs. Put your hands together for Afonso. Did he do good?
Thank you so much.
And just by the way, this is one of his products. Do you want to talk to that for 1 minute?
A second. This is bin, basically. But why does this bin exist? This bin is for you to put your food scraps, to then you take it out into your compost bin in your house or your community garden. The reason this exists is because one of the barriers today for people doing composting is that it smells and it's ugly and I want to touch old food scraps. By doing something elegant that meets a human need without damaging the ecological constraint, we're promoting those small little conversations of people, okay, I have this beautiful bin in my kitchen because I do composting, you should do it too. So that's why something like this exists. Even though you could grab your food scraps, take it outside with your hands and drop it. Sometimes you need that extra push.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. They're available at Banish Table and can be purchased today. Afonso, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Was he good? Do we like that?